In 1993, 3 boys went missing in Arkansas. 3 teenage boys would later be accused of their murder because of the way they looked and dressed, and were accused of being Satanists. The case of the West Memphis 3 is a case that should never be forgotten and remind us that we can be accused just because of the way that we look. Join us as we examine the case of the West Memphis 3 on this episode of True Crime and Authors.
Welcome to True Crime and Authors Podcast, where we bring 2 passions together. The show that gives new meaning to the old adage, truth is stranger than fiction. Here's your host, David McClam.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of True Crime and Authors. Of course, I am your man, David McClam. Hey, if you guys haven't already, make sure to follow us on all of our social medias. One link to a link tree can be found in the show notes that will get you every link you need to have pertaining to the show. All right, guys, as you heard at the top, we're going to talk today about the West Memphis 3. You have heard me allude to this case several times. I did allude to being West Memphis 3 if you listen to the Adnan Syed episode, so we're going to talk about it today. However, there is no way I could recapture what was already shot about 2 years ago. So what I've done is imported this episode from my other podcast, A Day with Crime. There's no way I felt that I could recapture the emotion behind it or bring it to you any better than we did there. So sometimes I'll bring some cases over here that I really want to do on this side from that show because it was shot so well. This will introduce you to my daughter, who is my co-host, Geneva. Just let me say happy birthday to her. The 8th was her birthday. As well, let's say happy birthday to Shannon Jump, who was one of the authors on the show. Her birthday is also the 8th. So this will introduce you to her. You will hear how we banter back and forth. Maybe you want to go check out A Day with Crime. But this is a very important case, and I don't feel like I would do it any better justice than what we already laid down. At the end, I will come back and tell you how I feel about this case today and where it stands and what's going on to close it out. All right, guys, so here it is. This is the case of the West Memphis 3. I hope you enjoy it. All right, so we're going to jump into this case that is very near and dear to me. I followed this case back during this time throughout. So today we're going to talk about the West Memphis 3. So bear with me because I have notes in several different spots. I think it's important because this case happened so long ago that we do give you maybe a little bit more than we usually do so that you can understand where this case is, where it's going, what ended up happening in the aftermath, why I may sound like I'm heated, because you may be too when I'm done. So let's jump into the West Memphis 3 case. First, let me tell you about the 3 principal people. Damian Eccles, who was born December 11 in 1974. That makes him 43 now. Jesse Miss Kelly was born July 10, 1975, makes him 42. And Jason Baldwin was born April 11, 1977, which makes him 41 years of age. So now you know about those 3. Let's jump into the case notes that I have. So the West Memphis 3, as they were known, are 3 men who, while were teenagers, they were tried and convicted in 1994 of the 1993 murders of 3 boys in West Memphis, Arkansas. So we'll get to those 3 boys in a minute. So irretrievably because of this, Damian Eccles was sentenced to death. Jason Miss Kelly Jr. was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 2 20-year sentences. And Jason Baldwin was sentenced to life imprisonment. So what you need to know about that, I want to give you those sentences first so you can put that into perspective of what happened after that. During the trial, the prosecution asserted that the children were killed as part of a satanic ritual. So here's their crime. So 3 8-year-old boys, Steve Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, were reported missing on May 5th of 1993. The first report to the police was made by Byers' adopted father, John Mark Byers. Remember that name? We're going to talk a lot about Mr. Mark Byers. Around 7 o'clock that night. The boys were allegedly last seen together by 3 neighbors who in affidavits told of seeing them playing together around 6:30 the evening they disappeared, and seeing Terry Hobbs, which is Stevie Branch's stepfather, calling them to come home. Initial police searches made that night were limited. Friends and neighbors also conducted a search that night, which included a cursory visit to the location where the bodies were later found. Later, they did a more thorough police search for the children, which began around 8 o'clock on May 6th. That was led by the Crittenton County Search and Rescue Team. The searchers did canvass all of the West Memphis area, but focused primarily on the Robin Hood Hills. So if you ever heard of this case, it's usually referred to as the Robin Hood Hills murders because of where they were at. The boys were reported last seen despite a shoulder-to-shoulder search at Robin Hood Hills by a human chain. So around 1:45 p.m., a juvenile parole officer, Steve Jones, spotted a boy's black shoe floating in a muddy creek that led to a major drainage canal in Robin Hood Hills. A subsequent search of the ditch revealed the bodies of 3 boys. They had been stripped naked and were hog-tied with their own shoelaces. Their right ankles tied to their right wrists behind their backs, the same with their left arms and legs, and their clothing was found in the creek, some of it twisted around sticks that had been thrust into the muddy ditch bed. The clothing was mostly turned inside out. 2 pairs of boys' underwear were never recovered, and Christopher Byers had lacerations to various parts of his body and a mutilation to his private area. So because of that is why they went into this satanic ritual. So without going too much deep into there's your crime, I gave you the sentences. So now we'll start the discussion so we can get a little bit more into this and we can get a little deeper. So the first thing I'm going to say is the reason why this came up as a satanic ritual situation, because if I had to give you the whole entire case, we'll be here 3 days. This is how intricate this case is. This is truly a case of I'm going to convict you based on what you look like. Because notice I said that Damien Echols was the only one that got a death sentence. That's because Damien Echols was into goth. He dressed in goth clothing. He also had heavy tattoos. Matter of fact, since it's so that he has more tattoos. And like most of us who is that age at the time, around the 15 to 17 age bracket, we probably was mischievous kids. So he did things he should not have done. So that's why he got picked on. So Geneva, knowing what you know about the West Memphis 3 case, how do you feel about the fact that, for one, these 3 boys, before we get into, mental capacity and all that, because this case is full of that, what do you feel about Damien Echols being cited because of the fact that he was in the goth, he had black hair, he had tattoos, and because the way that the bodies was found laid out, and he had problems prior with the cops, they say he just had to do it?
To me, this sounds like a case of satanic panic, to be honest. I remember hearing about satanic panic. I think, it took place in like the 80s and the 90s, didn't it? That was when it ran rampant.
Right, because they were afraid of all the young people that like to dress in black.
Right, they like to dress in black and listen to grunge music and all that stuff. So to me, not only is this a case of you look scary, so you must be scary, right? I mean, because these 3 now men at that time were teenagers. They weren't like grown adults when they did this. You know what I'm saying? Like, they were still young teenagers, older teenagers, but they were still teenagers. You know what I mean? So not only do I feel like they were convicted based on what they look like, but I also believe that they were convicted because of this being the time of satanic panic. So they had 2 things really working against them. One is that they looked intimidating, especially Damien, because he was the one, he had, if you see him when he was young, like, his hair was real stringy. It looked like he hadn't washed it in like a week. It was, black, black stringy hair. He looked like, honestly, he looked like what people would stereotype as like a Marilyn Manson follower. You know what I mean? He's real pale in the face. So, I guess I could see how like people would find that intimidating or scary, but I definitely feel like, from what I know of this case, that it was an unfair, it was an unfair way of convicting 3 boys, essentially. 3 children, essentially.
And now, to kind of put that in perspective, since I have made references to the fact that Damien had been in trouble with the law before, All three of them really have, okay, because they hung around each other, at least two of them. So if you look at it, so at the time of their arrest, Jesse Miss Kelly, just to give you some ages, Jesse Miss Kelly Jr. was 17, Jason Baldwin was 16, and Damien Echols was 18. Okay, so Baldwin and Echols had been previously arrested for vandalism and shoplifting, respectively, and Miss Kelly had a reputation for his temper and for engaging in fistfights with other teenagers at school. Now, before we go deeper, let's talk about Jason Miss Kelly for a minute, because if you haven't seen this case, you would pick up and say this was the less likely boy to be able to do anything like this. His IQ, which I don't have exact numbers in front of me, but his IQ was very low. Okay, even though he was at 17, he was functioning in some aspects as maybe like a 6 or 7-year-old. So that would almost be like saying that my 8-year-old could run out here, orchestrate this kind of murder, cut people in the private area, and help dismantle them or whatever the case is at a capacity brain of a 7-year-old. This is what we're doing with Jason Miss Kelly. They also said going on that Jason Miss Kelly had pretty much said that Damien Echols was the one who did the crime and that he was standing there. Well, they grilled him by himself for several hours, sometime days. So when you have somebody, because understand they wanted this crime to be placed on these boys. It was open, shut. It was open, closed, and shut. Judge, jury, executioner. Once they had these three, they stopped looking. And the importance behind that is there was another guy that was seen that people said, we saw this guy running, ended up running into a local McDonald's. They didn't even look for him. So on that part of Jason Miss Kelly, what do you feel about, because, this is something that's happened many times before in cases where they've got people without an attorney, without a parent, very low IQ. They push them to get them to confess. And then they go, oh, he confessed. We got our murderer. We got our killer. What do you think about that?
To me, like you said, Miss Kelly had a very low IQ. Even when you listen to interviews with him as an adult, you can tell that he's not like mentally and educationally, he's not 100% an adult. You know what I mean? Like he's not where someone his age should be at all. And I'm not saying that he's not smart or anything like that. So like I don't want anybody to misconstrue, but you can tell when someone has you can tell when someone has some kind of a learning disability or a cognitive disability where it slows down their advancement. And that is definitely how, what you feel when you hear him interview. And it's very easy to beat someone that is not 100% where they should be developmentally wise, because eventually they will just tell you whatever you want to hear. You can feed them information that they could just repeat back to you. And then you could be like, oh, okay, well, write this down in your statement. You know what I'm saying? I definitely feel with Miss Kelly that he was kind of beat down up until the point that he was like, yes, this is how it happened. This is what we did. This is what I did. This is what Damien did. You know what I'm saying? Like that was where it came in. But also it seems to me like he was fed information that he just then spit back out, because a lot of times, I'm sorry to say, in cases like this, cops will say, well, if you just tell us the truth and tell us what actually happened, we'll let you go home. But the whole thing is that once they get what they perceive as the truth, what they want to be the truth, then they slap you in handcuffs and say, oh, I'm sorry, you're under arrest. You know what I'm saying? So while it is 100% unfortunate and I think completely immoral to do something like that to someone, it does happen. And I think that in this case, it definitely happened with Miss Kelly for sure.
So what we have, if you haven't picked up what my stance on it, is a modern day witch hunt, because it goes a little bit deeper, and then maybe you can see why. So autopsies were done across the three boys. The forensic pathologist, which is Frank J. Peretti at the time, indicated that Byers, he died of multiple injuries, while Moore and Branch died of multiple injuries with drowning. because they did find Moore and Branch in the little creek that was there, and they determined that they had been drowned. Now, the thing that gets the most out of this case, which is why there should have been some more research done, is the police initially suspected the boys had been raped, but they later said that no, that didn't happen, despite trace amounts of sperm and DNA found on a pair of pants. Now, I'm going to stop right there. If you found trace amounts of semen where there's DNA, why are we not testing this against these 3 boys? You have DNA sitting there. You had another investigator say that there was no DNA there. If you go a little bit deeper, they came back and said that they feel like the Byers boy had been purposely castrated by the murderer. And later comes out says, okay, I ain't trying to be gross, but if you cut somebody in that area, there's going to be a huge amount of blood. You're not going to be able to get away with the amount of blood that's going to be there. There was barely any blood found at the site where they found Christopher Byers, which means that this had to happen to him off site. So somebody had to do this to him and kill the boys somewhere else and bring them over. I'm heated because we have DNA evidence. We have something that can be traced. You can take all 3 of these boys out, get blood, whatever you need to get to prove that this was not them. So I stand on my point that it's because it was a witch hunt. They had the 3. Everybody wanted, as we'll get more into in a little bit, everybody wanted these 3 to be guilty.
And if you want people to be guilty, why would you test DNA to prove that they're not?
Right, because if you quote unquote lose it, or you lie and say we tested it and it matched, which they couldn't do because they would have to produce that in trial. Why? Because you have a whole town against you. That heats me up. So so I know you feel kind of similar. What's your thought on that? Do you think, with the DNA, do you think that we could have found out that it wasn't these 3 and they would have got out of jail before 18 years?
Look, we're going to get into this, I'm sure, later, but I feel like there were better suspects than these 3 boys in this case. You know what I'm saying? There were people that were much more convinced that did this than these 3. But because everyone in this town wanted the 3 freaky kids to be the ones, the creepy kids, the outcast kids to be the ones that did this, why would they test DNA? You know what I'm saying? Because then they can just say, oh, there is no DNA, or whatever they're going to say to basically to surpass the fact that there was DNA. To basically, you know what I'm saying? To be like, oh, well, we didn't test it because we were convinced it was these people. But there are just, like you said, it's a witch hunt, because there were people. I mean, if you go and you watch the documentary on HBO, the 3-part documentary on HBO, at least for me, I was like, but y'all didn't look at anybody else though? Like, I can name at least 2 people that I feel would have been far better suspects in this case than the 3 boys that ended up being convicted.
Well, since you segued into that, let us jump into one. Let's talk about the man that I probably cannot stand more than Jose Baez. So what you guys need to understand is, yes, Geneva said there was 3 HBO documentaries. There was Paradise Lost, Paradise Lost 2, Paradise Lost 3 Revelations, and as of late, a few years ago, they released West of Memphis. Understand that these documentaries was written and was shot from the perspective that the producers, who also did not believe that the 3 was guilty, wanted to shoot a documentary so they can deep dive to find out what they could. Now, before I go on, I want to say that not only did the West Memphis 3, as they were dubbed, have people on the outside who didn't mean anything, like myself, right, saying that they were innocent, but we have celebrities. We have Pearl Jam's frontman Eddie Vedder. We got Johnny Depp. We got singer Patti Smith. The outspoken Natalie Maines of the Dixie Chick, just to name a few. If you know anything about the Dixie Chicks, they don't throw their names on anything unless they sure. So let's talk about the daddy. Now, they've always said that for somebody to do mutilation of any kind, especially to a genital area, it's personal. Somebody knows you. So how funny do you think this is? If you ever watch these 3 documentaries, and I'm going to say, please go watch them. They're still up on HBO right now. You will see what we're talking about. John Mark Byers, as he's better referred to as Mark Byers, was always in the camera. Before we started shooting, Geneva was telling me that, her fiance was saying, is this about the boys or is this about the mama? That's because Mark Byers and his wife was always in front of the camera. They was always yelling and screaming. She was always calling Damien Echols a devil. It was so bad that John Mark Byers actually went out to a mock grave where he supposedly had buried the 3 and was saying how he was going to urinate on their grave and was lighting fire and his teeth was all falling out. So let's talk about one of the main reasons. I saw, you know it's true. I can see that image in the back of my head right now, and he's trying to talk and his teeth is just anyway.
I know, it's so gross.
So here was the first damning thing to me. First of all, my mom always told me the person that shouts the loudest has the most guilt to concede. So he was always shouting, he did it. When they came to shoot the documentary, Mark Byers gave a knife to cameraman Doug Cooper. Now, this is going to make y'all real mad. Doug Cooper was working with the documentary makers Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sanofsky while filming the first Paradise Lost feature. The knife was a folding hunting knife manufactured by Kershaw. According to the statements given by Berlinger and Sanofsky, Cooper informed them of his receipt of the knife on December 19, 1993. After the documentary crew returned to New York, Berlinger and Sanofsky were reported to have discovered what appeared to be blood on the knife. HBO executives ordered them to return the knife to the West Memphis Police Department. The knife was not received at the West Memphis Police Department until January 8th, 1994. That's the first part I want to discuss about No Teeth Byers. Gave him a knife.
Byers.
Gave him a knife, right? Had blood on it, returned it, don't get received until what? Almost over a month later. I say evidence. What you say?
I say evidence. And if we're going to be calling him No Teeth Byers, I think we need to change our description to a father-daughter comedy podcast.
Hey, sometimes you got to throw some humor in these morbid cases, but
here's my thing. First of all, I'm gonna just put this out here because we want to be talking about this man. What's his name? Michael?
Mark Byers.
Mark Byers. The child is Michael Byers, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So Mark Byers, or as my dad affectionately calls him, No Teeth Byers, because I mean for real. I think he's guilty of sin. To be honest, I think that knife was 100% evidence. Like I said, I feel like there are people that are far more suspect than these 3 boys that were accused and convicted, and he is one of them. I'm sorry. I just feel like, why are you up in the front of the camera all the time? Like, this documentary ain't even about you. It's about your kid, or your stepson, because actually that child was not his child. I think they had the same last name, like his mama changed his last name, but
right.
It was actually his stepfather. So look, I can understand why the mom would be all up in there, I guess, because it's his mom, you know what I mean? So I can understand why she would want, but I mean, as a mom though, and of course I don't know because I have thankfully never been in a situation like this, but I feel like even as a mom, I wouldn't be like, if they came and asked me some questions, like, do you think that these people did it? And I thought that they did, then I would say yes, but I wouldn't be all up in the camera crew's face being like, oh, he did it. He's the devil's child. Like she was so extra and so over the top about it that it seems like either she knows something or she was a part of it or something. I don't really know how to feel about his mom. I really don't like to think that mothers would do that to their offspring. I know that it happens. I'm sure we'll talk about some mothers like that on this podcast, but I don't unless I have proof of it, I don't like to think of a mom doing something like that to their child or knowing about it. But at the same time, I feel like Mr. No Teeth over here is real guilty.
Now, before we go with Mark Byers, I do want to say this because the fact that we did preference that there was another guy. I said McDonald's, I'm sorry, Mr. Bojangles. But just so you guys can preface this further before we go with Mark, because Mark fits more into this. So I said that there was another guy that they didn't even investigate. Here's how deep that goes. The sighting of a black male as possible alternate suspect was implied during the beginning of the Miss Kelly trial. According to local West Memphis police officers, on the evening of May 5th, 1993, at 8:42 p.m., workers in the Bojangles restaurant, located about a mile from the crime scene in Robin Hood Hills, reported seeing a black male who seemed mentally disoriented inside the restaurant's ladies' room. The man was bleeding and had brushed against the restroom walls. Officer Regina Meeks responded to the call, taking the restaurant manager's report through the eatery's drive-through window. By then, the man had left, and police did not enter the restroom on that date. The day after the victims' bodies were found, Bojangles manager Marty King, thinking there was a possible connection to the bloody man found in the bathroom, reported the incident to police officers who then inspected the ladies' room. King gave the officers a pair of sunglasses he thought the man had left behind, and the detective took some blood samples from the walls and tiles of the restroom. Police detective Brian Ridge testified that he later lost those blood scrapings. A hair identified as belonging to a black male was later recovered from a sheet wrapped around one of the victims. Now, before we go on Mark, I ain't trying to throw my own people under the bus, but there you go. So you have a black male full of blood called, right? Bojangles called the day after the body's found and said, hey, this dude's in here. Can you come back? They come back a couple of days to take blood samples. They conveniently lose the blood samples, but you found a hair belonging to a black male wrapped up in the sheet of one of the boys. Now, with all that we know about Mark, what do you think about that? Do you think it's possible that this could have been him? Maybe he committed a different murder, or because of all of Mark's yelling and screamings?
First of all, why is it always the damn black man?
Well, the thing is this, though. You can look at it this way. This is in West Memphis, okay, where I'm sorry to say it, but there's still a lot of racial stuff that goes down there. They'd rather hang these three than to go chasing the black male that was full of blood.
First of all, I don't really believe the black man angle. I mean, I know that it's been pretty substantial. I feel like he maybe could have committed a different crime, but I don't feel like it's connected with the boys. With the three boys that were murdered. So if he committed another crime that would have resulted in him being covered in blood or bleeding himself or whatever, then sure. But I don't think that it had anything to do with the three boys that were killed.
So here's what makes Mark Byers even more guilty. Okay, so as you guys go along, you find we give you a little bit more tidbits just to draw y'all in a little bit more. So what we didn't say is there was a teeth print left on Stevie Branch's forehead. Miss Kelly, Eccles, and Baldwin all submitted imprints of their teeth. They were compared to the bite mark on Stevie Branch. Didn't match. However, conveniently, Mark Byers had all his teeth removed in 1997 after the first trial, but before an imprint could be made. He stated that reasons for the removal were apparently contradictory. So Stevie Branch was his son, or one of the boys killed. His teeth imprints is on the head. They don't match neither boy, but he conveniently has his teeth removed before we get an imprint. And if you remember the documentary, when the one of the producers pressed him and said, "Well, Mark, why wouldn't you give your teeth imprints?" He snatched his teeth out and said, "See, I have no teeth." To me, that further cements some guilt on Mark Byers' part. What about you?
Guilty, Mark Byers.
Now, we should also cover and tell you that he also had a history with the police of abuse. abuse to his wife. She had even stated that she was afraid of him. Now, I guess I should kind of say that after this whole case was over and everything else, and Mark Byers moved away, his wife kind of disappeared. And she hasn't been seen to this day. And he got into more trouble with the police. So that's why I feel that Mark Byers is guilty of this crime. Or at least should have been looked at. At least should have been looked at. What do you think?
First, he's guilty. Second of all, he should have been looked at. Look, even if it came back that he wasn't guilty, that he had nothing to do with it, fine. But like, at least look at the man. You know what I'm saying? In any other case, the first people that we will look at are the people that are the closest to the victim, right? So if they're married, we look at the husband or the wife. If they're not married, we look at who they immediately live with, their immediate family, right? But in this case, they were so convinced that these hoodlums, if you will, they were the ones that had to have done it because, again, satanic panic. But at the same time, like I said, there are better suspects. Like there are people that look better for this crime. And I'm sorry, going and getting your whole mouth of teeth removed. I mean, he probably didn't have a whole mouth of teeth, but you know what I mean. Go and getting your teeth removed before they can take imprints of your teeth. That's real suspect, sir. Like what do you mean? Like, yeah, you could have gone and got your teeth removed after you gave the imprint. Like, you couldn't have waited a month to go get your teeth removed. I don't think that they were that bad if you waited so long to go get them removed in the first place.
But then it gets worse. So now you guys are seeing why I said if I had to give you the whole story in the synopsis, we'd be here forever. It gets worse, right? Because so now we've got Mark Byers as a possible suspect. Now, one of the biggest witnesses in the Three Boys' cases was Vicky Hutcherson. She recanted her whole testimony in October 2003. She stated when she gave an interview to the Arkansas Times, she stated that every word she had given to the police was a fabrication. She further said that the police had implied that if she did not cooperate with them, they would take away her children. She then also said that when she visited the police station, employees had photographs of Eccles, Baldwin, and Miss Kelly on the wall and were using them as dart targets. She also claims that an audio tape the police said was unintelligible and that they eventually lost was perfectly clear and contained no incriminating statements. Further evidence that the police wanted just to hang these three, you got a woman who was one of the main reasons that they got convicted, recanted and said, oh no, the cops threatened me with my kids. They're practicing dart practice on their pictures. So basically, I was pushed into saying this. Before you say anything, it gets worse. So now we got one father, Mark Byers. They did DNA testing for new evidence in 2007. And this leads to the whole entire Free the West Memphis 3 thing, which I was a part of. I had a screensaver on my computer. I was on the Free the West Memphis 3 site.
Same.
I had a Free West Memphis 3 t-shirt. I was 100% engulfed in this case because I knew these boys were innocent. So in 2007, they collected some DNA from the crime scene. The DNA they collected from the crime scene was finally tested. None was found to match DNA. No DNA matched Eccles, Baldwin, or Miss Kelly again. A hair not inconsistent with Stevie Branch's stepfather, Terry Hobbs, was found tied into the knots used to bind one of the victims. The prosecutors conceded that no DNA evidence tied the accused to the crime scene, but the state stands behind the convictions of Eccles and his co-defendants. But on May 5th of 2009, Pamela Hobbs' declaration in United States District Court said that one hair was consistent with the hair of Terry's friend, David Jacoby. Now, she finally went on to say, after the murders, my sister Jolynn McCary and I found in Terry's nightstand a knife that Stevie carried with him constantly and which I had believed was with him when he died. It was a pocket knife that my father had given to Stevie, and Stevie loved that knife. I have been shocked that the police did not find it with Stevie when they found his body. I had always assumed that my son's murderer had taken the knife during the crime. I could not believe it was in Terry's things. He had never told me that he had it. Now we got Terry Hobbs in the mix. Possible that Terry Hobbs and Mark Byers did this? I mean, look at this evidence. Where are we going?
This is why I said multiple people, because I could not remember Hobbs's first name. So, look, I think that it's real possible that Terry and Mr. No Teeth decided that they were going to go, and for whatever reason, they got mad. They felt like the boys didn't listen one too many times, whatever. I feel like they had something to do with this. Because first of all, Terry Hobbs, why are you going to have a knife that you know that your son carries around on his person? Which means that theoretically that knife should have been on his person unless someone that knew where he was and that he was murdered took it off of his person.
Right? Because he carried it all the time.
And this child always carries it with him. Look, I have brothers that are in Boy Scouts, okay? My mother's boys are in Boy Scouts. Now, if one of them I think at least the two older ones, I believe both have pocket knives. Now, I'm sure my mom does not allow them to just carry them on their person because, they go to public school and stuff like that. So there are some places where they cannot carry them. However, if say one of them or both of them said, Mom, we're going to go out into the country and whittle some wood or something, we want to take our pocket knives, and then my mom knew that they had those pocket knives on their person, and then all of a sudden the pocket knives were missing because something happened to them, that means somebody took them. But to find it in Terry Hobbs's drawer, that's real suspicious, because why is it in your drawer if your son always carries it on his person, but yet no one found that knife on his person? Which means that it couldn't have been like how if you find things on someone's person, the police may take it into evidence and then package it up and give it back to the parents. But it wasn't like that, because the mom is even saying no one found the knife on his person. I just assumed that his killer stole it from him or whatever. So how do we know that he didn't take that knife off of this child and then use that to kill? You know what I'm saying? Because that would be real convenient.
Right. And this was, if you watch the 3 documentaries, this is going to be the feeling that you are going to continuously have throughout this. And it's because there was so much shouting, so much kill him. I mean, they were really pushing for Damien just to be done away with. I mean, Mark Byers was real vocal about he was really upset that it's taken him this long to put him to death, because they just wanted this whole thing to be over with. So let's move into that. So because of all of this stuff, now we get into kind of like what I want to call a little bit of the redemption phase. So what you have to understand is these boys sat in jail behind the murders, the horrible murders, I should add, of these 3 young boys for about 18 years. They had filed appeal after appeal after appeal, and it was denied. Now, the one thing that Mark Byers started doing was blaming the press, because these boys had no help until the HBO documentary team showed up and said, we believe in this case and we want to do a documentary. So he got pretty upset now, because he's like, all you guys are doing is bringing this to the forefront. Just let these sons of bees die. They need to go. But because of that, it started forcing the prosecution or the government to look deeper into this case. Now you got Johnny Depp being the most vocal celebrity. I mean, you guys need to understand that this wasn't like a little scale. We got Eddie Vedder and Pearl Jam throwing big old celebrity concerts just to continuously raise money for the defense of these boys. You've got Johnny Depp talking about the West Memphis 3 every time he was in public. He did several TV appearances on talk shows just urging people to research the case for themselves. All of that, plus the stuff I just read to you about Terry Hobbs, his hair, and his knife, led to another request for a retrial. Because we're figuring, okay, if you're not going to let them out, let's at least hold a retrial, get them back in front of a judge, in front of another jury that can exonerate them. So that's what they did. In 2007, on October 29th, they filed papers in the federal court by Eccles' defense lawyers. Now, understand, I'll keep saying by Eccles' defense, because Eccles is running out of time. He sat on death row for 18 years. His health was failing him. His eyesight was going from all of the years of being locked up in jail, some solitary confinement. So Eccles' defense team at the most was trying to do everything they could to get him out of jail. When they refiled these paperworks, the attorney who represented Miss Kelly was all on board with that too. So we need to file this. Let's get this taken care of. They refiled it. Now, here becomes the beauty. After they refiled that, they had to go along with it. So let's talk of this one step by step, because then the outcome becomes real heated. What do you think about the request for a retrial? They did get a request for a retrial. They went back to the crime scene on September 10th of 2008. The judge again denies the request for a retrial again, stating that the DNA test is inconclusive. That heats me up, because I'm like, if you would have ran the proper DNA test in the beginning, you wouldn't have an inconclusive.
Right. So give the boys a retrial. I don't quite understand why they never got the retrial. I think that saying it because it was inconclusive is a cop-out, to be honest. I think that they deserved a retrial, especially because in order for them to ask for a retrial, that means that something was found in order to constitute a retrial. Like, you can't just ask for a retrial unless you have something that you can use in said retrial. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not something like an appeal is different than a retrial. Like, you can appeal all you want, like, until your appeals either run out or you don't have any appeals or whatever your case is. If you have appeals, you can use them until they run out. But a retrial, you actually have to have new and substantial evidence in order to even ask a lawyer to request a retrial for you. So the fact that they had enough to request a retrial means just give them the retrial. Like, what is the worst that's going to happen? They're going to get let out?
Here at True Crime and Authors, I read a lot of books. Every author that you've heard me interview and everyone that you will hear me interview, I've either read one of their books or I'm in the process of reading one. So how do I keep up with all of the books that I read? Well, that is where the show's sponsor, Catch Creations 614, comes into play. Catch Creations makes digital handmade planners and journals, and for those who want something on paper, printables as well. She can make anything from My Little Pony to Black Panther, anything that you can creatively think of, Catch Creations 614 can get it done. With excellent customer service and excellent communication, the owner, Kristen, will make sure that your journal comes out right and perfect the first time. And for those who are listeners of this show, you will get a special 10% discount when you use the code TrueCrime10. Catch Creations, best handmade planners, journals, and printables in the business. Check it out now. I hope y'all listeners up there ready to get real heated. Because I'm going to tell you right now, the West Memphis 3, oh yeah, they got released from jail. But they got released from jail under the best benefit of the government. Here's what happened. So after weeks, finally the plea deal released in 2011. So after weeks of negotiations on August 19th, they ordered another judge who was lower than the first judge to go in and look at this, okay? Because the judge, David Burnett, he was elected to the Arkansas State Senate. So November 4, 2010, he was elected to the Arkansas State Senate. They ordered a lower judge below him to examine the claims of misconduct by the jurors, because there was a piece of that where they said some of the jurors was acting in misconduct because they were looking at things they shouldn't have been looking at. They had made statements that the press shouldn't have made. So this judge wanted to make sure everything was good. So they negotiated for weeks. So on August 19, 2011, Eccles, Baldwin, and Miss Kelly were released from prison as part of a plea deal, making the hearings ordered by the Arkansas Supreme Court unnecessary. The three entered into an unusual offer plea. I'm going to explain to that what that is to you guys in a moment, because this is going to be the part that's going to heat you way up. So they took this plea. Stephen Brogg, an attorney with Ropes and Gray, who took up Echols' defense on a pro bono basis beginning in 2009, negotiated the plea agreement with the prosecutors. Under the deal, Judge David Laser vacated the previous convictions, including the capital murder convictions for Echols and Baldwin, and ordered a new trial. Each man then entered an Alford plea to lesser charges of first and second degree murder while verbally stating their innocence. Judge Laser then sentenced them to time served, a total of 18 years and 78 days, and they were each given a suspended imposition of sentence for 10 years. If they reoffend, they can be sent back to prison for 21 years. Let me explain all that legal jargon to you in layman's terms so you can be as mad as I was and still am. An Alford plea is the most cheapest plea that you could ever take to get out of a situation. What an Alford plea says is that you are going to say that you're guilty, but we're going to let you stand in front of all the media you want to. We're going to put you on the news crews. We're going to put you in the newspaper. You can say that you're innocent, but it's going to go down as you're guilty. We're going to impose a sentence on you. So they imposed a 10-year sentence, but because they served 18 years, that was gone. They time served. Now we're going to impose parole on you, but we're going to go ahead and suspend that, Mr. Victims, because of all the stuff you've been through. But for a period of 10 years, if you do anything else, we're going to have you back here. Here's why that went down. Their lawyers found evidence, some of which I've read to you, that said we want a retrial. They knew that they had enough evidence to go into a court of law, have another trial, and the jury would come out and prove that these boys were innocent. The problem with that is now, since the state made a mistake, you go back to a retrial and they're exonerated. All three of these boys can sue for millions. And the report, after they let them go on the Alford plea, the prosecutor even came out and said this was the best situation for all parties. And one of the reporters said, "Is it the best because it saves the state money?" He says, "Everybody had a win today because these boys can never sue for anything that was wrongly done to them. They are still looked at as a murderer because they had to get out." And the only reason this plea deal was taken, which has since caused some problems between Damien Echols and Jesse Baldwin, is because they didn't want to take it, but they were urged to take it because Damien was not only sick, but they were about to execute him. And in my beliefs, because they could have waited for the trial, but they told them a new trial could take anywhere from 1 to another 5 years. By that time, they would have killed Damien Echols on death row because they would have hurried that stuff up because there's evidence. What's your thought on the Alford plea in which the West Memphis 3 ended up getting out of jail?
Well, we're going to have a new t-shirt design. One's going to say, "I want to punch him in the face." And the other one's going to say, "I'm done." Okay? Because this is ridiculous right now. I thought that the whole making them take, well, not making them, but basically dangling an Alford plea in their face. Like, yes, they're going to take it because you ain't going to give them any other way out. Are they going to sit in jail and then Damien be executed? No. Like, they're going to take the Alford plea and just say, "Well, I guess it's just a wash," and call it good. Like that's what they're going to do, because what other choice are you giving them? Like you're literally giving them either be looked at as a murderer for the rest of your life or die. That's it. That's it. Like that's no, in my opinion, that's no choice.
And I do want to say this in preference. Now, all three of these boys are out. Damien is the only one that is married. Lori Davis married Damien while he was yet still in jail. She took a lot of flack for that. I think they had been married like a good 5-6 years before this came along. But she was very instrumental in making sure that this case stayed in the forefront of everybody's mind, and was also instrumental in making sure these boys got a new case. She was the one on the front lines about the whole thing. So since then, Damien has become an actor, and he's also become an author. He's written about 6 books, 2 that pertains to this case. One is called Life After Death, written in 2012, and then one called Yours for Eternity, written in 2014. Now, he has never denied that he has a love for being a Wiccan. He has released a book called High Magica. But your religion, the way you look, the way you dress, should have the how many tattoos you got, the color of your skin, should never dictate whether or not you are looked at solely for murder when there is at least 3 other people running around that evidence is highly pointing to, and you just decide not to go look at them. So, what is your closing statements, arguments, discussions on the West Memphis 3 case?
So I think it was a crappy way to get out. I think that they felt like they were backed into a corner because they were. So their choice was take the Alfred plea or okay. So the 2 Jessies would be still sitting in prison, and Damien would probably be dead at this point. So while I think that it was a pretty cruel way of getting them out, I understand why they took it, and I'm glad that they're out, even if for the rest of their lives it will be on paper that they are murderers, which I don't agree with. I definitely feel like the 2, I'm just going to call him his father, even though technically he was a stepfather, but I think that the 2 fathers were involved somehow. They know something. So even if they aren't the ones that did it, you know what I'm saying? They know something, whether that's that they hired someone to do it or that's that they know who did it because that person came and told them. I don't know. But it's very suspect to me that one of them got their teeth removed after finding out that there were bite marks left on one of the children's heads, right? And the other one has one of the children's beloved pocket knives. Like it's very strange to me that these 2 things happen, but yet they're not looked at all because these other boys looked scary. So they must be the ones that did it. So, I mean, in my opinion, I've always felt like the West Memphis 3 were innocent. I know that during the time, Dad, I'm sure you remember during the time that they were talking about free WM3. You know, I had my banner up on Facebook. I had changed my profile picture. I did all that as well because, you know, honestly, like this gonna sound real funny. Y'all gonna laugh and stuff, but truthfully, it don't even surprise me that Johnny Depp was behind them because, I mean, Damien Echols kind of be looking like Johnny Depp.
Well, Johnny Depp did say that the main reason that he wanted to be a part of it is because he hates bullies, and much like Damien Echols, he went through some of the same teasing because of the way he chose to dress. And if anybody has seen Johnny Depp lately, as he gets older, he gets a little bit more gothy every year. So.
And look at the 2 of them. Like, if you compare the picture of Johnny Depp and Damien Echols, they almost look like they could somehow be like related to each other. I'm just saying. Okay, I'm just saying. So, look, I don't think that they did it. I couldn't tell you exactly who did it, but I do feel like the 2 fathers have something to do with it. They were there. They orchestrated it. They were involved in this, and truthfully, they got away with it. They got away with whatever part of this that they had because they weren't even looked at. You know what I'm saying? So, like, sir, why did you have a knife? And other sir, why did you get your teeth removed? Like, that just does not. Those are the 2 things that don't sit well with me at all. On top of Mark Byers just wants to be running his mouth talking about shoot him in the head, I'm going to pee on their graves. Like, that's not even necessary, first of all. So you look like a fool because you're saying unnecessary things. On top of, why are you screaming to the hilltops for somebody to be executed if you're just so distraught? I mean, I understand being so distraught about the death of a child or a loved one, especially a child, but of any loved one, and like, you know, saying like, I want to be present at their execution. Like, I get that. Like, that's something that is said a lot when it comes to people that are on death row for crimes they've actually committed. But to just be like screaming to the hilltops a bunch of nonsense, it makes you look even more and more and more suspicious, in my opinion. So that's what I got.
Well, before I give you guys my last thoughts on this case, I want to say this. Please, 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 if you have not, don't just take our words for them. I'm going to give them to you in the full title. Go. If you have HBO or HBO Go, these are still there. Go watch Paradise Lost, The Child Murders at Robin Hood Hills, followed by Paradise Lost 2, Revelations, and Paradise Lost 3, Purgatory. These are all three documentaries. Of course, they go together. This is how much the HBO team believed. They had to go back 3 times to get all this done, which you would see on the last one is when you start to see that there's some light at the end of the tunnel where they may be freed. Also, if you have Netflix, go check out the movie Devil's Knot. It is still there as well. That movie was made off of the book Devil's Knot by Mara Leverett, which she wrote about the case. Go watch this stuff for yourself, and maybe you'll feel like we do. The bottom line of this whole case is this. Sadly, for whatever reason, we have 3 children that is no longer here because somebody did a senseless crime. The saddest thing about that is we're never going to find out who killed Stevie Branch, Christopher Mark Byers, and James Michael Moore because of the fact that they stopped looking for people. Even an FBI investigator had even said that this crime was indicative of more of a single person than 3 unsophisticated teenagers. There's a lesson to be learned by all of us from this case, and here it is because we've all done it. The next time you're in the street, don't cast a judgment on somebody because of the way they look. Don't cast a judgment on the homeless person because of the fact that he's asking you for $1. We don't know what that person's story is. If you're like me, if I have it, I give it. And I know a lot of people say it's because of the fact that there's a lot of scammers out there. I let God deal with that because he knew where my heart was at when I gave you the $1. If you really tell me you need money to go eat and I give you $5 and you go buy some booze, that's on your conscience. But we all pass judgment against people because they're homeless or they're wearing the wrong coat or they look a certain way. This kind of attitude is what landed these 3 boys who clearly should have never even seen the inside of a jail cell in jail. We have to stop this as a society. We got to stop the witch hunts. We got to stop the politics because that's what it comes down to all the time. I see it in California. We want you to pardon this dude, and the governor knows that he should, but because he's up for re-election, his re-election means more than that. I am happy to say that I back this case 100%. One thing we didn't say is there were so many letters. If you watch this documentary, I used to have this as a background for my Facebook where they had so many letters that it took more than 20 people just across the front steps of the state capitol, wherever they was at, to hold them up. That's how many postcards these people got. So I'm glad that they got out of jail. I'm sad that they spent 18 years of their life behind bars because of a witch hunt that went on. But that's the lesson I think we can learn from this. So rest in peace to the 3 boys that did not deserve to die. I hope one day that they catch the real killers. Or should I say that they catch Terry Hobbs and Mark Byers, because that's who I think actually did it. I'm just gonna say it. When you watch these documentaries, that's what you're gonna see. Because within the first one, I was in a half hour and I said he got something to do with it because he's always flapping his gums. So, guys, with that being said, that comes to a conclusion of another thrilling episode. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed that case of the West Memphis 3. So let me give you guys just a little update. So what has happened to them since their release? They got released from prison August 19, 2011, which makes it 11 years since they have been released. So since they've been out, Jesse Miskelly has become engaged to his high school girlfriend and enrolled in a community college to train as an auto mechanic. Jason Baldwin, whose real full name is Charles Jason Baldwin, stated in a 2011 interview with Piers Morgan that he worked for a construction company and he was learning how to drive. At this point, that is the last thing we've heard from Jason Baldwin. And of course, Damien Eccles, as far as we know, is still married to landscape architect Lori Davis. They were married in 1999 in prison, and he moved to New York City after his release. However, that is not the end of the West Memphis 3 story. So you see, on August 19th, 2022 marked the 11th year that they have walked away from prison. And Damien Echols and the West Memphis 3 is still seeking justice. So at the end here, I'm just going to clarify a couple things that we said and to show you why we know for a fact that there's something to hide. Damien Echols has went back in front of a judge because he wants their name to be 100% cleared. Again, let me remind you, when you take an Alfred plea, you still have to cop to the crime. Even if the crime that they give you to cop to is less than what you were originally convicted of, you are still saying, I did that crime. Yet they will allow you to say as much as you want that you are innocent. As a matter of fact, on the day that the West Memphis 3 was released, they had a news crew that was there where they stated that they were innocent. However, in the books, they are all three still murderers. Damien Echols went back to court because he wanted them to test the touch DNA, and the judge denied that request. And this was in June. Shut them down. So now they're going to go to the highest court there, which is their Supreme Court, to see if they can get it done. He has stated that all he wants is that this be tested so they can find the real murderers that did this. They still hold on to their innocence, and those of us who's covered this case still believe in their innocence. However, if you remember through the episode, we talked a lot about Terry Hobbs. Well, this should put something in your brain to maybe think that maybe we're onto something. If you don't remember who Terry Hobbs is, he is the stepfather to Stevie Branch, who's one of the boys that was murdered, and one of the people that we said that we believe had something to do with this. So let me tell you this, and maybe you may have the same thought. So they went to Terry Hobbs, and they asked him if he killed his stepson, and he responded he did not kill his stepson or his friends. But then they asked him, do you want the evidence to be tested? And his first statement was, if the West Memphis 3 want it tested, then I don't. He then later clarified his position by stating that he could support testing if all the evidence in the case was tested and not just the ligatures. However, he changed that again when he went on an interview on the Mysterious Circumstances podcast, which is hosted by Justin Rimmel. Terry Hobbs then said that he hopes the judge does the right thing and orders the evidence to be destroyed. He stated that he has never been identified as a suspect in the case and that the police admit that the hair is likely his, but say it could have gotten on the victim through secondary hair transfer. Folks, I'm sitting here telling you something's not right with this situation. I believe that Terry Hobbs has something to do with this, just like I believe Mark Byers has something to do with this crime. For him to come out and say that he doesn't want any of this stuff tested, that he hopes that the judge does the right thing and destroy the evidence, would destroy the fact that these three boys will ever be found innocent, and would destroy the facts that anything that he had to do with this will ever come to light. So Mark Byers, full name John Mark Byers, even before this, had a list of crimes. He went down for terroristic threat. He went down for theft. But the most suspicious thing, other than the teeth prints and him not wanting to do that, was that 3 years after Christopher Byers was murdered, Melissa Byers died. And the investigation into that pretty much looked at that he may have had something to do with that. But of course, he denied that. However, if John Mark Byers had anything to do with the death of those three boys, he took it with him to his grave because he was killed in a car crash in 2020. He was 62 when he passed. Now, there's still people that say he had nothing to do with those deaths. I'll leave that up to you. From the things that I have told you and the things that you could see if you go watch these documentaries, my mother used to always say that the loudest person in the room often has something to do with something if they just can't be quiet. So I'll let you guys determine that. All right, guys, I thank you for tuning in to this one. next week, I'm going to give you guys a double author drop. The first one we're going to do is Jamie Gehring. Now, we've all heard about the Unabomber. We know about Ted Kaczynski, but do you know what it is like to live right next door or behind him? Well, Jamie Gehring does. You don't want to miss that interview. And also, we're going to be dropping for you guys David Dean. David Dean is a retired police officer who's wrote a book called Tomorrow's Dead that tells fictional stories that's loosely based on some of the things that he has seen. And he has another book coming out soon, so you don't want to miss those. All right, guys, I thank you for everyone that's been tuning in. I hope you guys are enjoying this show as much as I am enjoying putting it together for you. As always, I hope you guys are being safe out there, and always remember, always stay humble. A little love and compassion goes a long way. And this is the podcast where two passions become one. I'll catch you guys on the next one.
Thank you for listening to True Crime and Authors. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. Join us on social media. On Facebook at True Crime and Authors. On Twitter at Authors True. On YouTube and TikTok at True Crime and Authors. And email at truecrimeandauthors@gmail.com. Cover art and logo designed by Dazzling_Ray from Fiverr. Sound mixing and editing by David McClam. Intro script by Sophie Wild from Fiverr. And I'm the voice guy, your imaging guy from Fiverr. See you next time on True Crime and Authors.